There are only a few times in the Gospels when the writers retain Jesus' use of an untranslated Aramaic word. Usually it's in Greek. Among them, you might recall, are Hosanna, on the reading that we celebrate on Palm Sunday, a word that means Lord save us. Rabboni, a word in Aramaic that means teacher. Perhaps most commonly known, Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me, from the cross. And today's word, ephphatha, which means be opened. The word is the climax of Jesus' encounter with a deaf and mute person who desires to hear and to speak. On the surface, this is just another healing story, one among many in Jesus' travels through the Galilee. They all kind of blend together for me after a while. But here, in this story, the use of the transliterated Aramaic word, in addition to suggesting perhaps a greater historical authenticity for this account, also invites us to seek deeper layers of meaning in this particular episode. Why leave this strange word untranslated, even in the Greek, unless the writer of the gospel intended their hearers to linger over it? In a way, this verse from Mark's gospel, and especially this word, ephphatha, serves as a metaphor for Jesus' entire earthly ministry. Jesus came so that we might be opened more to each other, opened more to the world around us, and most of all, so that our hearts might be opened more towards God. Whether by his own healing touch, or by one of his prophetic words, or surprising actions, one of his faithful protests, or natural miracles, or even just by his presence. Jesus' whole ministry was meant to open humanity to the divine way, the way of self-giving and generosity towards others that we heard in the lessons today, the way of compassion and togetherness, the way of belonging and inclusion, in short, the way of love. This is the precious, hard, and beautiful reality to which Jesus hopes somehow, some way, his presence will open us. In the gospel passage we just heard, this all happens quite literally. When the man is open to Jesus, three things happen. First, his ability to perceive reality expands. He can now hear. He couldn't before, now he can. Second, he obtains the ability to communicate his new perceptions. His tongue is released. He can speak. And third, the transformation in his own life inspires in others an openness towards the goodness of God. The crowd, it says, is astounded beyond measure. We can see the same effects in our own lives, even if most of the time it's not quite so literal, even if most of the time we're not fully certain it's Jesus that has touched us. When we are opened by something in some moment to the divine way, that way of self-giving and generous love, the same three things happen to us. First, our ability to perceive reality expands. We become aware of the deeper or wider truths about what matters most in life. Not just individual success and security, not just happiness for us, but shared compassion, authentic community, and ecological integrity. Second, we also become empowered to communicate our new perceptions to others. This is often hard, especially at first, Many of us don't know how to speak to others about the opening for God that has emerged somehow within us through some kind of experience or encounter. But there it is, some kind of new life-giving awareness within us that wants to be shared somehow with others. And third, how we live our lives begins to inspire in others an openness to the divine way. It's not intentional. It's certainly not coercive. It's simply attractive. And it's attractive because what the divine way offers isn't the false veneer of a perfect life. It's attractive because the divine way of love is honest about the joys and sorrows of living a life open to God and the kind of deeper meaning and purpose that such a life brings for us. For the deaf and the mute man in the gospel today, it was Jesus' very touch that opened him to God. But what about you? What opens you to God? What expands your perception of reality to the point where you find yourself encountering deeper truths about life? What experiences of some power larger than yourself are strong enough that you feel compelled to share them with somebody else? For many of us, one thing that opens our hearts to God in this way is some kind of experience in the natural world around us. Last week and this week and next Sunday, we will be observing a mini-season here at St. Paul's called Creation Tide. This season is an invitation to attend to the ways that our relationship with creation informs our spirituality. Now, I imagine that we each have a special place in nature that awakens in us a spiritual impulse towards prayer or understanding or some kind of wholeness. Is that a fair assumption? Feel free to talk back. Oh, hey, awesome, excellent, there we go. Maybe you visited your special place this summer. I did. The leaflet cover is my very bad photo of a tree in one of the special places in nature out in the Bay Area where I'm from that I return to from time to time for that kind of connection to greater universality. But for you, maybe yours is a beach, or a lake, or a deep forest, or a high mountain, or even a desert. For Thoreau, it was a pond not too far from here. It is apparently anywhere there are birds if you are Mary Oliver. And it is Yosemite Valley for John Muir, one of my faith heroes. When I think about the capacity of nature to open us towards the mystical truth about the universe, I think of John Muir. And the reason why I love Muir so much isn't just his conservation efforts, which were great and are quite responsible for the national park system as we know it. But it's deeper than that. It's because of the way that Muir's experiences of the natural world opened him to a much more liberated, compassionate, and generous understanding of God. And how this experience of being opened by nature compelled him to share his wider perceptions about God and to live a life that attracted the curiosity and admiration of many others, from peasants to presidents. John Muir grew up in Scotland in a very religious household. They were such strict Calvinists that at one point his father decided the church wasn't strict enough or Calvinist enough, and they had to move to Wisconsin, which was like the middle of nowhere, to start the true church. It's not there anymore. The only book that John Muir was allowed to read when he was a kid was the Bible, but he chafed at this, and he cheated and read other books. And he also chafed at many of the other spiritual disciplines of his family's church. So he left. He literally left. He walked out the door for about 6 months, took a long walk through the Midwest. Later, he spent some time at the University of Wisconsin, and then he moved to the coast. His walks continued and grew longer, months and months. Up the coast, all the way to Alaska at one point, and of course, many times in Yosemite. During all this time, John Muir was a prolific journal writer and a very good pen pal. He wrote many letters. There are thousands of pages of his original correspondence which catalog his spiritual internal journey as he engaged in these encounters with nature over his whole life. They speak of all manner of flowers and sunsets and meadows, and also of fierce grizzly bears and wide ice crevasses that are endlessly deep, of fantastical lightning storms. Among these descriptions of his walks are sprinkled numerous theological revelations and insights. And as a whole, they reveal how it was his experience in the wilderness over time that opened him to a much more expansive and liberating Christian faith than the oppressive, exclusive dogma of his youth. A passage from one of his private letters gives a sense of this. He writes, "We all flow from one fountain soul. All are expressions of one love. God does not appear and flow out only from narrow chinks and round-bored wells here and there among favored races or places, but he flows in grand, undivided currents, shoreless and boundless over creeds and forms, and all kinds of civilizations and peoples and beasts, saturating all and fountainizing all." The deaf and the mute man was opened to the divine way of love in an instant by Jesus' touch. John Muir was opened to the divine way of love over a lifetime of seeing God's hand at work in the wilderness. How are you opened to the divine way of love in your life? What might open you to it a bit more? The powerful beauty of a summer thunderstorm? The suffering of an aging parent or spouse? The feel of the bread and the wine in your mouth? The joyful innocence of a child's first day of school? It almost doesn't matter what it is. God just wants an opening into your daily life, even if you often don't notice that God is there. Just an opening, wide enough for the light of Christ to shine through whatever shadows are in your life, and to nourish more and more the seeds of faith that are already in you. Amen.